You've heard their name, you may have even tasted their coffee, but have you ever been to Counterculture Coffee's Roastery? Let's go. Hello, I'm RoasterKat here in Counterculture's Roastery. This is Brett, and he's going to be giving us a tour of this entire facility. So let's go.
Hello, welcome to Counterculture. This is our Durham headquarters. We have been in this building for about 7 or 8 years, and every year it looks different, it works different. So let's go take a look at the current state of Counterculture Coffee in Durham, North Carolina. First off, a big part of our roasting program is bringing green coffee in. It comes in through this dock, and then is warehoused in various racks, but also staged on large pier pallets. The majority of our coffee does come in on these pier pallets, 25 bags per pallet. That's how the warehouse stores them, that we pull them from, and it's a really efficient way to store coffee. Andres is driving the forklift of what we call a super sack. It's the newest iteration of how we're dealing with green. A super sack contains 1,000 kilograms, roughly 15 bags of coffee. The only way we can use a super sack, if we want to keep walking and observe, is via cable bay and a silo system.
Wow. This is a serious operation.
Yeah. So all of this equipment is new to us as of last year. So Mary's pulling the ripcord. Once the funnel opens up, there's no stopping it. So we'll have to load it all into one silo bay. And we might go through 2 super sacks per product per day.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you have a serious line of roasters over there. I guess I'll stick on here. So it goes from the super sack into...
Yeah, this is a tubular drag conveyor, and you'll start to see green going up with each cup. Actually, once they open the hatch.
Sure.
What he's doing right now is just a test run to make sure it actually goes into the intended bin, thus avoiding mistakes and also the potential for it to rain on the floor. And once he gets that visual and auditory confirmation, he'll open the hatch. And the nice thing about the super sack is we can just passively let it go into the bin. We don't have to do a lot of manual lifting.
Yeah, that's very nice for roaster wellness.
Yeah.
For sure. And it seems like it goes pretty quickly.
Yeah, I want to say maybe 15 minutes for the full sack to drain. One silo bin can hold a full two super sacks. And it's not unrealistic for us to run through that entire bin in a day.
Wow.
We're also storing lots of bags in jute, Grain Pro, maintaining a lot of like blend components out here. Yeah, and you can see there's certain visual differences with different coffee types, different countries, and you're familiar with that. Like Ethiopian bags look definitively different than Colombians.
Yeah. Cool. So green. Does all of your coffee go into one of these silos, or are there some coffee that goes straight to the roasters?
Good point. It's a hybrid. Some coffee goes through the silos. Several other coffees go through manual loaders up at a platform, which I'll show you. Generally, we reserve these silo bins for our year-round blends, house blends, espresso blends, the highest volume selling coffees.
Cool. Great. All right, and then where does the coffee go from there?
So we are at a bit of a shift change up, so it looks like we're stalled out on these roasters. I can ask them to start pulling in a batch, but we might loop back around to it in a few minutes if that's cool.
And how many how many people are working in this warehouse at any given time?
As roasters?
Yeah.
7.
7?
Yeah.
7 at a time?
Well, we have a hybrid first shift and second shift.
Yeah,
So
oh, okay.
some folks start in quite early, and then other folks filter in like
Yeah.
early or mid morning.
Amazing.
Yeah. So we will have the opportunity to see. Maybe we can walk over to the cable bay and silo. He's now pulling batches down, dumping into a reservoir. And then once he gets his weight right, he'll drop it into the cable. There's one continuous loop. It's just constantly going around.
So then that.
So this is heading towards the roasters, and this is the clean line of pucks coming back.
All the way up, over.
And eventually, it might be a little bit hazy, but we'll start to see the green coffee drop into the hopper.
Oh, so all of those tubes are connected over there?
Sure.
So then it opens on whichever.
It's sort of an on-demand system. So
Yeah.
if he calls coffee to that machine,
Yeah.
it'll close off the hatches to the other machines. So every puck of green beans that pass through will fall down that chute. If we selected a different machine, that hatch would be closed and it would continue on to the next machine.
But it's all driven by these pucks. Wow. So this isn't a vacuum system. It's like physical. These pucks like kind of are a shelf that moves
Yep.
the beans through.
Yep.
You can see it really here. That's super fast.
And once again, I would point out a trend here: copy in and copy out. It's a never-ending cycle, or
Yeah.
sort of back and forth between green to roasted, etc.
Yeah.
We can cut
I'm
through
sure
this way.
with such high volume, you have to kind of keep the copy in, copy out trajectory
Yeah.
going at all times. Copy goes from there, and it goes up, 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 all through here, into there, and into there.
For roasted coffee, the format has also changed. For many years, we've used brute buckets. For larger batches, though, we've moved up to like high-capacity tubs
Yeah.
that can be picked up with electric forklift and driven all the way up the hill, because it is quite a distance from this machine all the way to the bagging lines.
Yeah. And can those buckets can hold about how many like brute bins worth?
So brute bins, I want to roughly 125 pounds.
Yeah.
These tubs, depending on the style, 500 up to 800.
So it's a lot more economical. Also, yeah, limits the amount of times you're just going back and forth.
Sure. So this is our newest machine. It's a refurbished Probat 240 GG. It's the first style of Probat like this that we've ever worked with. It's much more convective than our other Probats, which we'll look at in a second. And we've had to retool a lot of our profiling and sort of roaster inputs to get batches here tasting in line with our other machines. But this came online just in time for a lot of growth at the end of the pandemic for us. So we certainly are thankful for this machine and lean on it quite heavily. One unique aspect to it is that being such a high format machine, there's no handle for the roaster operator to open the drum.
Yeah.
Similarly, there's no way to charge the green gate, so it's all done through the touch screen. But when the drum opens, it actually detaches from the faceplate. So you can see that inner ring is just spinning.
Yeah, yeah.
That whole part protrudes out, and the batch will drop down.
Wow. And then it goes obviously cooling tray, and then you have a vacuum system. Is this?
Yeah, or destoner. So the maximum capacity for this machine is close to 500 pounds green. We've determined that 400 pounds is better in terms of profiling, how how long the roast takes, how easy it is to convey the coffee in. So we're standardizing around 400 pounds per batch on this machine right now.
And do you roast only certain profiles on this one versus the others?
Exactly. It's much more limited to, say, Big Trouble, Hologram, R46. And that's primarily because it can only pull copies that are in the silo. There's no other loader system for this one machine. We've had two, I think 50s era Probats for as long as I've been here, or pretty much. These will roast a maximum capacity of 200 pounds. We try to keep it a little bit under that just for, once again, profiling nuance, and also just trying to keep roast times a bit shorter. Once again, you're seeing the batch being destoned here.
And do these machines, since they're basically the same, are they roasting the same coffee?
That's a good question. We tend to break it up just based on what we need to fill production lines. So originally, or say a few years ago, we would roast the same products on all machines at the same time and kind of go through the list, generally like heaviest to lightest volume. At this point, we're running a hybrid approach where these two machines will pull coffee from the silo, so they're both somewhat more limited. The Loring and this Probat will pull from a manual kit loader, so we can do more complicated and one-off type copies from those loaders.
Cool. So we go from Probat to Loring.
Sure. This Loring was installed, I want to say in 2015. When we were moving into the building, we just purchased the Loring and had it delivered straight here. So on day one, we had to figure out how to roast on a Loring and experience a few curveballs with that. Matt right now is roasting our sort of staple decaf called Slow Motion.
I love a decaf. And you said this is loaded by like vacuum loaders over here, so you're coming straight from green. I see.
Yeah, so one of the funky aspects of this building is that there's just a lot of sort of architecture that was here before we got here.
Yeah.
And thankfully we have this ledge, which takes a lot of the manual lifting and loading out of Loring hoppers. So a lot of this is just for real-time use, so that folks who are grabbing coffee or blending coffee know which lot to use at which ratio. So we've got recipes for each of our year-round coffees here, with generally a shorthand and an ICO number. A couple of listings for what we would call like subscription coffees, just like very clear point of reference information. And then each of these sections are for a different roaster. So Probat 1, Probat 2, Probat 3. A lot of this is the team communicating with each other. So they're letting each other know when they get chaff outside. They're letting each other know where they're at in their list by hash marks. And that sort of helps the team kind of trim up extra or excess waste in the process, and that they know where everyone else is at. So folks are kind of helping out by grabbing coffee for other people when needed. And it also just keeps us from forgetting a batch or roasting an extra batch to have an analog.
And is like, does everybody have a different color, or what are the little tokens?
I think it's, this is for production's reference, not roasted, in progress, incomplete. So, yeah, so our decaf is in progress right now. And that lets production know it's coming out, but maybe not right now. But in this case, he's already done 6 batches, so there's a nice lineup of color-coded slow motion buckets.
So anybody can look at this and kind of know exactly what's happening at what machine, so they can know how to help or just to leave things alone.
Sure, it also helps me know how to supervise the flow, and if something needs to change, this for instance, this is probably determined to be lower priority.
Yeah.
So this is a very easy, clear way to communicate what needs to happen now and what needs to happen at the next juncture. We also list our organic purges here. Just as a reminder for folks to purge when they're moving from conventional to organic coffees. Also mention our smallest roaster. It's a Sasa Samiac, 20-pound capacity, but we run 12 to 15 pounds on it. It's the roaster that the company started out with in '95. And it still works like a dream. And it's great for micro lots, special releases, things that we don't want to risk throwing like 50 pounds into a large lowering. So it does give us a little bit of extra mileage when it comes to special coffees that we want to pay a lot of attention to.
Cool. And do you do like sample roasting in labs? Like obviously not on the production floor.
Yeah, we don't do sample roasting out here anymore. And one aspect of becoming a larger and larger company is that those roles are sort of triaged out departmentally. So the coffee buyers do essentially all of the sample roasting, sample approval, all of that. And we sort of take the baton from them at that point.
Who determines the primary roast profiles, like profile roasting?
We create those in the roasting department with some really loose guidelines from the coffee department.
Very cool. Fire in there? Fire. Whoa. That's crazy. It's just like straight up, it's like a jet.
So yeah, that burner drives the entire roast.
Yeah.
One thing that we noticed with this style of Probat is that if we make pullbacks like we might on the other roasters, the batch can go really cold very quickly. In that there's not as much of that sort of conductive baseline to continue to propel the coffee. So we have to be really careful with pullbacks on this machine.
That's fascinating.
And it might be worth checking the sight glass there.
Oh,
Got a massive sight glass. As you can see, it's still early in the batch.
And how do you determine, of your roasters and people, who's going to work on which machine each day? Is that predetermined, or do people fight over their favorite machines?
Seasonally, it shifts up. I do think some folks like the isolation of certain stations, and other folks like the more collaborative back and forth. And the more collaborative roasters tend to be the ones where we're running coffee back and forth through the loaders. But it's also based on our sort of training protocol or training regiment. Different folks have different levels of experience, and how it normally works is that newer folks will start out on the Samiac, make all the mistakes that they don't want to make later. Yep. And then once they have their sea legs, they'll move up to the lowering. They'll do longer runs of single coffee, so they have a lot of time to do trial and error, iterative batch profiling, and all of that. And then the Probats involve a bit more nuance, a bit more intuition, and also can incur more issues like beans getting stuck in the door, causing green leaks, or it's just there's a bigger program at play at the Probats. So we tend to make sure that folks are really ready to profile any coffee, any sort of roast level by the time they move up to those machines.
Yeah. And do most of your roasts run on some sort of automated profiles, or it's all done manually? Other than user inputs through a PLC or programmable logic controller, the touchscreen essentially. Yeah.
Other than the automation that causes actions to happen, every decision is made in real time and in roast. So all of these folks are expected to have a working knowledge of profiling, different types of green varieties, and how to take a basic roast recipe or roast idea and replicate it on each machine.
So do most of the people that you've hired for the roastery have previous roasting experience?
About half and half. We really value bringing folks from the production department into roasting because they already understand the cadence and the rigor and intensity of this work. And it does translate one-to-one in some instances. And we can also teach a lot about coffee here too. We don't necessarily need someone who knows everything about green coffee chemistry, for example.
Sure. And I can imagine, I mean, profile roasting, or like the romance of being a coffee roaster versus the practicalities of being a production roaster are not exactly the same. Like I feel like, at least from what I've seen and what I've experienced, being a production roaster, it requires a certain type of person who's willing to stand by a machine for 10, 12, 15 minutes at a time.
But I will mention, you're absolutely right about the necessity of someone just being willing to pay attention to a somewhat, it's not a slow process, but it involves some patience, right? And some intentionality. One thing that does help folks stay engaged is what we call the sort of 3-batch flow. So ideally, every roaster is focusing on the batch in the drum. They're also planning on the next batch that's going to get conveyed around. They're also maintaining custody of this batch, which they'll put through a quick QC check, and then also labeling it appropriately and getting it to production. So they're always bouncing between those poles, with the roast in the drum being the main priority at any given time, because that's where we're really adding value or potentially messing something up.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, that'll keep your brain engaged all day as well. Are there ever any like bottlenecks getting coffee out of the silos? Like if both of these machines need to be loading at the same time?
Exactly. So there are a few bumps along the way. Inevitably, this machine will run maybe a minute slower per batch, so eventually they'll come to a head and hit a traffic jam. But what they try to do is maintain like a 7 or 8 minute split. So if Andres is in the middle of his batch, like Maillard phase or 300 degrees, however you want to think about it, Mary's ideally at the very beginning of her batch or the very end. So that way the timing never really causes a tangle with the silo, because they both are dependent on the exact same track.
Right. And how many roasts are you doing kind of per machine per day about?
We could, I would have to count. I want to say we're totally across all machines, we're doing over 120 batches.
Wow.
This has changed the calculus though, because we're now pushing more batches through this machine, but it means fewer batches on the smaller machines.
Sure.
Maybe this is a better way to talk about it. Our average day right now is around 20,000 pounds. We've been hitting 100,000 pound weeks for the first time in company history. I bring in about 500 to 800 bags of coffee per week, which are, it's still unbelievable to me how much coffee moves through. We did about 4 million pounds of coffee in this facility in 2024.
Wow.
So maybe those numbers give some context to where we're at as a company. And I'm even told quite often by our senior operations manager that this is a small operation in comparison to some larger roasters that are out there.
So, but I mean, smaller compared to some, but also huge compared to others.
And that gives us a great challenge, but also a lot of reward in that we're still trying to maintain a really close beat on quality, sustainability, efficiency, with higher and higher volumes. So we're trying to do the pragmatic work of production, but also delivering on as much of the promise of these coffees as possible.
Yeah. What, like in practicality, what efficiencies have you built into the system in order to make sure that you are being the most efficient as possible, or the most streamlined in such a large facility?
We try to not roast in excess of any one coffee, because if the production lines don't need a coffee today, they'll need it tomorrow. It's not a bad thing, but it's sort of time that we have taken a detour. So we're trying to keep a really tight cap on certain coffees, or on each coffee in our menu. Another efficiency that we work with is trying to produce coffee for different bagging lines at different times. So any given day, wholesale might take priority. We have a really large grocery order that might take priority. We have large retail pushes that might take priority. So we try to build our roast list to get coffee to the lines that need it the most when they need it.
And you plan that out at the beginning of every day, depending on orders that have come in?
Sure. So we walk in every morning. We have a report of all the pounds we need to produce, but then we've got several other kind of reports or formats that help us see which of those pounds will be for grocery lines, which ones would be going to subscription boxes for 5-pound bags, etc.
This one almost ready to drop. Do
Oh,
we
yeah.
get to see it?
Yeah, it's worth watching the drum open up. You know, I remember early on in my roasting days thinking like I needed to, check the dryer every 2 minutes or something. You know, the coffee would essentially be still raw and I would be checking it manually. We still value sensorial data highly.
Yeah.
When the roasters are analyzing the coffee, at the very end they're going to look for, color changes, physical changes being texture, bean size, color in general. They're also familiar with pop cycles and listening for crack to escalate and then drop off again. That's a really good tip off for where we're at in a roast. Checking the dryer certainly helps, getting some of the aromatic hit, also just incentivizing folks to look at the actual product.
Yeah.
And that's a great QA step for us to just ensure that we haven't gone off the rails with a profile, like just training our eyes to certain shades of brown.
Yeah.
Certainly data also helps us fill in a lot of those gaps with, analyzing how long the roast is going, where we're spending time in the different phases.
And do you take like Agtron readings and weight loss readings or anything like that afterwards?
At this volume, we can't take weight loss readings.
Yeah.
We've done studies before and know how to assume, 85% yield for a certain roast level, 84% if it's a bit darker, and then we'll do double checks of what's in the bucket at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Excuse me, at the end of the day. So right now, Mary is using a remote to the silo, which is also a way that keeps us kind of efficient. She doesn't have to run all the way to the silo every batch. She's in yellowing. I would guess she's at 330 degrees.
Yeah.
So it's a good time to start queuing up the next batch. We try to maintain a pretty seamless flow. So by the time a batch is being dumped into the tray, we want to have that next batch secured on top.
Yeah.
We don't want to spend a lot of time cycling and losing thermal capacity.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine that having the control panel for the silo right next to this machine also helps the two roasters be able to stay on the same page of who needs to do what, who needs to use the silo. And have you roasted on these machines yourself?
I have. Not necessarily every day, but I'm fairly fluent with each of them. Making a couple of last minute adjustments.
That's wild. Yeah, I've never seen that before. That's awesome.
And you can kind of spy a caster underneath that's helping run the drum.
That's how it spins the drum. Cool.
All of the chaff and exhaust output goes through the wall. So chaff collectors are outside, which keeps things a bit cleaner.
Yeah. Sweet.
Mary's now dropping in coffee from the cable. Kind of closing in on the end of her batch.
And would you consider like counterculture in realm of light, medium, dark? Where do you guys tend to self-identify?
Certainly lighter than we were when I started.
Yeah.
Slowly shifted from a second wave mentality to more of a third wave. But we've maintained several darker blends just because we know some folks love that. On this machine, there's all of the gas, exhaust, drums, speed settings are done through the PLC.
Yeah.
But this one has a few more manual features. Obviously, the green charge gate and the roast door are done manually.
Yeah.
The destoner is done with a manual sort of catch or drop.
Do you have a favorite machine to roast on yourself?
That's the machine that I feel like sort of had to sort of break a lot of bad habits on, you might
Yeah.
say. I learned some very hard lessons over there, but now it just feels like classic roasting to me.
And how often do you all do like maintenance and like upkeep of the machines?
We have a series of weekly, monthly, quarterly maintenance tasks. Generally, the weekly tasks are just kind of cleaning out the dust traps, trays, places where things collect more frequently. And then we get into like bearing maintenance and whatnot, kind of less, more in a monthly kind of time frame.
That looks like a heavy door.
Yeah. The counterweight, to hold coffee in, the counterweight has to be pretty far out on the bar to sort of force the door shut.
Yeah.
And one has to, it's hard to hold it in that center position.
Yeah.
So there's an emphasis on flipping it all the way up.
Yeah. Cool.
And the counterweight's so heavy that it actually snapped the arm off one
wow.
morning, just from like shutting and the force of that.
That's crazy.
And then once again, seamless roasting.
yeah.
So roasted coffee gets dropped, temperatures kind of re-equalize, and then the charge-in happens pretty shortly thereafter.
Yeah, that's a really quick between that. Really neat. Sweet. And then the roasted coffee gets put over here. Are these like some of the things for the roasted and then bins for roasted?
So yeah, that's a product and also a product code. We call these jacuzzis. So this is jacuzzi land over here. They've never been used for that purpose. And then buckets queue up over there. And generally it's just to keep from, colliding two different systems.
Sure. And then they go from the jacuzzis or buckets down to the packaging line and then out the door that way. Yeah. So it's like a single shot, green coffee in, roasting, out.
And generally the jacuzzis go to the higher capacity machines. So the machines that are going to be doing the most bags with the most automation. For single originism and lesser blends, not lesser in a quality sense, but just lower volumes. Yeah. Those will generally go to the more manual packaging lines and done in kind of a single run.
Thank you for coming along on this tour of Counterculture's Roastery. Now make sure to like and subscribe for more coffee and coffee roasting content. We'll see you next time. Happy roasting!